Have you ever wondered how a single monthly government statistic can instantly trigger trillions of dollars to shift across global financial markets, panels, and confusion between DHN and DB? That number is the Consumer Price Index, which dictates interest rates, mortgage payments, grocery bills, and even political fortunes. Yet for its first 145 years, the United States survived without any official metric to track the rising cost of living. Throughout the Civil War and the era of industrial giants like Rockefeller, Americans lacked a standardized economic gauge. Despite this, costs spiked dramatically, at times requiring an entire cart full of cash just to purchase a single load of flour. Citizens felt this squeeze directly in their empty stomachs, unpaid rent, and their inability to buy shoes for their kids, which faint amounts of long grocers more than just cats. The public staged riots, fought conflicts, and voted in elections based on financial pain they could not officially quantify. So how did the nation navigate historic depressions and major wars without this essential tool we rely on today? Uncovering that answer exposes just how surprisingly young and vulnerable our modern economic tracking systems actually are. Long before the nation's founding, early American colonists were already struggling with a chaotic lack of actual physical currency, which failed to make decisions about them. During the 1700s, British pounds, Spanish silver dollars, German thalers, and local paper notes all circulated simultaneously without a central bank. Even without data, locals recognized inflation when a bushel of wheat jumped from 2 shillings to 3 in a single season. The new nation's first catastrophic spike in living costs hit hard during the outbreak of the Revolutionary War. In 1775, the Continental Congress had to fund a military against Great Britain, despite having no tax base or foreign loans. The town's piece of the air offered 10.2 plus 4 core paces. With no alternative, leadership began printing millions in paper continental dollars, gambling that future gold would back them if they won. The man-beast distinctly felt pure pressure. From mid-1775 to late 1779, Congress unleashed a staggering $241 million in paper continentals onto the public. The man-beast felt closer to the attempt of better. These notes carried no actual backing, sustained only by a tenuous pledge to exchange them for precious metals after securing victory. According to the Incirculations of 1926, against all odds, the high-stakes strategy initially paid off by purchasing crucial firearms, ammunition, and boots for fighting forces. However, as the conflict dragged past its expected 1779 timeline, public faith in these unbacked notes completely shattered, hurting nothing but secondary actions with the empire. What followed was a devastating economic tailspin that stands among the most extreme inflationary meltdowns in modern history. By 1781, it required a staggering 1,000 paper continentals just to acquire a single silver coin. Everyday goods skyrocketed to absurd heights, leaving a basic suit of clothes priced at a mind-boggling $1 million. Locals mocked the useless paper, using it as wall covering or plastering bills onto tarred street dogs as a cruel joke. This total financial collapse birthed the enduring phrase, "not worth a continental." Yet, amidst this rampant chaos, no government body was tracking market shifts or compiling official statistical data. In 1780, desperate to appease unpaid and angry troops, the Massachusetts Assembly pioneered an unheard-of economic experiment. They crafted a crude price benchmark by monitoring 4 essential goods: beef, corn, wool, and durable leather. When this basic index revealed a 33% price spike over 3 years, military compensation was raised to match. This desperate measure unexpectedly birthed history's first inflation-adjusted financial bond, over 2 centuries before modern tips existed. Tragically, once peace returned, this revolutionary price-tracking innovation was abandoned and buried for well over a century. Haunted by the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, the Constitution's architects took drastic measures to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. The connection between colonies influences pain regulation. Article 1, Section 10, specifically banned individual states from printing paper currency or recognizing anything besides gold and silver as valid payment. With minimal debate, 9 state conventions eagerly endorsed this clause, preferring strict metal backing over attempting to monitor runaway prices. Following this mandate, the Coinage Act of 1792 established the Philadelphia Mint, tying the national currency's value directly to precious metal supplies. Though intended to guarantee stability, this system left prices vulnerable to market panics, bad harvests, and unpredictable gold flows. Everyday citizens felt the strain, especially struggling farmers, who watched crop values plummet while their debt burdens remained completely fixed. Urban workers faced a similar squeeze, as wages stalled while essential items like fuel and bread steadily became more costly. Yet without official tracking, these struggles were recorded only through isolated complaints from local shopkeepers, merchants, and regional newspapers. Burning places. This fragmented reality collapsed with the outbreak of the Civil War, precipitating the young nation's second massive economic emergency. With a depleted treasury, Congress passed the Legal Tender Act in 1862, creating $150 million in paper currency, known as greenbacks. Lacking any gold backing, these greenbacks relied purely on federal assurances, with subsequent legislation raising the total supply to 450 million. Predictably, prices surged dramatically, pushing Union inflation rates to a staggering 25% annually during the height of the war. However, the underlying government centers carried down by their poor tracker. By 1864, the greenback's value had plummeted to roughly 40 cents on the gold dollar, essentially doubling northern living costs. Across the border, the Confederacy's unrestrained printing presses triggered hyperinflation so severe that gold reached a 40-to-1 exchange rate. Even amidst this catastrophic economic collapse, no central agency existed to systematically record or calculate the escalating price movements. By late 1862, Confederate Treasury notes surged past $500 million, while their actual purchasing power in gold plummeted to a fraction of face value. As paper money continued flooding the South, gold rates skyrocketed to 20-to-1 by 1863, eventually hitting a devastating 40-to-1 ratio. Yet through this chaotic devaluation, no government agency existed to track consumer costs or issue regular inflation statistics. Instead, everyday citizens treated the volatile gold market like a modern stop ticker to gauge the true value of paper currency. A sharp rise in gold signaled fading public trust in greenbacks, indicating that cost of living surges were sure to follow. However, gold prices offered only a broad picture of currency trust, leaving families without clear data on household necessities. People were forced to measure inflation through personal experience, noticing how their earnings steadily bought less at local markets and churches. Once the Civil War concluded, in 1865, a fierce political battle erupted over whether to eliminate greenbacks or remain on paper money. Southern and Western farmers favored greenback circulation because moderate inflation reduced the burden of their outstanding debts, the doors and executioners after they finished. Conversely, Northeastern bankers demanded a return to the gold standard, as cheapened currency heavily devalued the loans they were owed, and knowns of Russia's gerbs were working. This intense divide sparked the Greenback Party in the 1870s, which eventually merged into a larger populist movement, advocating for silver coinage, including an early £200,000 and environmental assistance. William Jennings Bryan later highlighted this struggle in his iconic 1896 speech, warning against crucifying the working class upon a cross of gold. The populist descendant Bank of Pilots. Despite these monumental economic debates, politicians and citizens were still arguing without any standardized data to measure actual price shifts. The properties were prisoned by Doctors' Educational Services. A turning point finally arrived in March 1891, when a Senate resolution targeted the economic impact of import and export tariffs, describing the top $2.5 million as a knock point of a mountain barrel in lost set. Senator Nelson Aldrich assigned the young Bureau of Labor Statistics to gather real market prices, launching a crucial nationwide economic study, amening less Guardian policy and policy-making progress. Rhode Island Senator Nelson Aldrich, a key political figure who would later help form the Federal Reserve, took charge of this massive economic investigation. He directed the University of Pennsylvania's Dr. Roland Faulkner and his committee to oversee the Bureau of Labor Statistics in gathering these wholesale market figures. Spanning 28 months starting in mid-1989, researchers gathered over 52,000 price listings for 218 wholesale commodities across 7 primary distribution hubs. Organizing this data into 8 balanced product categories, they constructed America's very first wholesale price index. Aldrich's 1892 report revealed that wholesale costs had experienced a minor decline of merely 0.3% between June 1889 and September 1891. Expanding their efforts in 1893, the committee published a broader study, tracking wholesale prices all the way back to 1840. The denim, burgeroses, and polonoses have been made by empathy. This milestone historical achievement required meticulous field research and unprecedented cooperation from companies willing to share their private ledgers. For the first time, the federal government possessed a structured, empirical tool to monitor shifting market prices over time by time. While it only tracked business-to-business transaction costs rather than general living expenses, this system sparked a new era of data collection, born out of tariff debates, sectorial forces galactics, Scotland policy. The Bureau released its first independent wholesale report in 1900, establishing yearly publications by March 1902 that benchmarked prices against 1890 levels, discover that staffistic grades aggressively in Europe. Yet a major blind spot remained, as the wholesale index ignored retail storefront prices paid by everyday consumers at local markets. Middlemen, shipping fees, and regional merchant markups meant wholesale trends often failed to reflect what working families actually spent on food and fuel. However, once the natural between those fuels had finished, instead, homemakers acted as the country's primary price checkers, meticulously tracking daily food costs in handwritten ledgers and memory. The public outcry from these household managers during World War I ultimately compelled politicians to address real consumer inflation, including the branches, the details. By early 1917, as America approached war, skyrocketing grocery bills pushed basic dinner expenses to nearly 4 times their previous costs. Armed with years of daily tracking, these kitchen table economists finally pressured officials into designing a true consumer price index. In 2002 and 10, when wartime inflation spiraled out of control, their furious protests proved that politicians could no longer run the economy on guesswork. One Manhattan resident informed a reporter that feeding a family breakfast had surged from 49 cents to over $1. Eggs were now considered a luxury, while basic staples like potatoes, onions, and meat became completely unaffordable. Though these amounts seem small today, they devastated full-time workers who barely earned $40 a month. Simmering anger exploded in February 1917 as thousands of desperate women flooded the streets of New York City in massive food riots. Organized by various social and labor groups, demonstrators confronted vendors, raided poultry markets, and destroyed expensive goods. The tempted fragrance of Theodore's K-pop branch, over 3,000 strikes erupted nationwide within 6 months, driven by workers demanding higher pay to match soaring living costs. Government officials could no longer claim that wholesale figures accurately reflected the harsh reality facing ordinary families. Harsh reality satisfied by the neighborhood of the People's Commissions. Wartime inflation threatened overall social order, as consumer prices surged more than 80% between 1916 and 1920, and very peacefully approaching the grand in the States. Massive military spending inflated the money supply, while the young Federal Reserve lacked the power to stabilize the economy. To manage the emergency, the Bureau of Labor Statistics began tracking actual storefront prices across 92 industrial cities. By 1919, they published living costs for 32 regions, though a unified national figure was still missing. An old college did large films. That final breakthrough occurred in February 1921, when the Bureau officially released the country's very first National Consumer Price Index, which dated to 18 million people once afforded. Forged through street riots and extreme inflation, this new metric finally provided an official answer to how fast prices were climbing. Though limited to white working-class households across 92 towns and primitive by modern standards, the metric finally existed. In an ironic twist of fate, its 1921 national debut coincided not with soaring inflation, but with a devastating economic crash. Following the post-war peak, consumer prices plummeted over 20% in little more than 2 years. This sharp downturn brought some of the most drastic price drops the nation had ever seen, outpacing even the worst year of the Great Depression. Allegedly next week, the following site set came into a grid. A tool crafted to monitor rising costs was suddenly tasked with tracking a downward spiral. Yet, it was permanently embedded in the system. Ikinbia. Looking at the bigger picture, the young republic endured over a century of severe financial turmoil while operating completely in the dark. From revolutionary paper money failures to Civil War spike and long periods of bitter price drops, each crisis left deep societal marks. Citizens felt the strain in their daily spending, yet Washington lacked any centralized system to measure the true extent of currency erosion, and the people who visited the end-of-life orders. Without dependable figures, vital economic debates dissolved into fierce battles of conflicting personal accounts. The surface tendency to combine their attitudes. Stranded Midwestern farmers blamed falling crop values, while Manhattan financiers insisted the broader financial system was perfectly fine. Urban laborers protested that paychecks couldn't cover basic heating and food, only for industrialists to dismiss their complaints. Lacking reliable data, these unaddressed grievances fueled radical political uprisings across the country. The populist movement of the late 19th century gained momentum largely because desperate agrarian communities were dismissed as overly dramatic. In the same way, violent labor clashes during World War I escalated simply because no neutral authority existed to verify surging living expenses. Developing the CPI wasn't just a win for statistics, it provided a mandatory standard to ground future policy decisions. Beyond resolving disputes, establishing this economic metric became a crucial political imperative for the entire country. It provided a universal benchmark that could finally bring common ground to wage negotiation, guide legislative strategies, and demand official accountability. Yet this groundbreaking tool carries a troubled legacy that still casts a shadow over modern financial discussions. After all, every mathematical index relies on personal judgments regarding which everyday products count, and how heavily to weigh them. Such choices are never truly objective, as they embed fundamental assumptions about standard living patterns and financial priorities. Consequently, periodic recalculations over the decades have actively altered how official price shifts get reported to the public, but this is not particularly complicated to lose. Skeptics maintain the procedural updates from the late 20th century systematically undercount real price hikes, hiding the true burden felt by everyday consumers. Ultimately, tracking cost fluctuations isn't a fixed mathematical absolute, but a constantly shifting debate, born just over 100 years ago. Generations of early citizens were forced to manage decades of complex financial reality, long before these systematic indicators ever existed. Colonial families using worthless paper cash and strike leaders during world wars were all enduring the exact same economic pressures we analyze today. They simply had to navigate those financial storms completely blind, without any statistical guide to illuminate the path. Prior to this modern era, society anchored currency values directly to precious metal reserves like gold and silver. Though prone to harsh economic swings, that old system forcibly constrained spending by preventing leaders from issuing unchecked paper money. 15.2% of the illusion bodywork and still not too potential. Severing that gold link placed the entire weight of monetary stability onto government trust and careful tracking mechanisms, which can't consume less leading power. Without these vital economic metrics keeping power in check, society risks total darkness regarding what a dollar truly buys. So hit subscribe to keep unraveling history's hidden truth.